Today we find ourselves in the Book of Mormon.
Specifically in Alma chapter 19.
It's a story that unfolds among the Lamanites.
With a queen facing a predicament.
Her husband, King Lamoni, is in a peculiar state.
He's been like this for 2 days and 2 nights.
Yeah, it says that in Alma 19.5.
There's a lot of confusion.
Some people think he's passed away.
But the queen notices something.
That makes her out that.
It says, "To me, he doth not stink."
Interesting detail, right?
It's almost like a clue to her spiritual intuition.
Even before anything happens.
She senses that there's something more.
Yeah, deeper at play.
Absolutely.
Wouldn't she say?
Yeah.
So this intuition.
It makes her reach out to Ammon.
This Nephite missionary.
He's known for his miracles and teachings.
She's heard the stories.
And she sends for him.
She's practically begging him
to come see her husband.
This is in verse 4.
Yes.
And her plea to Ammon.
It almost shows her faith.
Even before she knows what's going on.
Right.
She doesn't know if Ammon can help.
But she's willing to reach out.
To place her trust in him.
Exactly.
And then there's this interesting exchange in verse 9.
Ammon tells her Lamoni's not dead.
But rather sleepeth in God.
Now, this isn't a typical way
to describe someone unconscious.
It's more of a spiritual transformation.
It's beyond the physical.
Exactly.
So Ammon is hinting at what Lamoni's going through.
And remarkably,
the queen believes him.
She states her belief.
Even though the only evidence is Ammon's word.
Wow.
Imagine trusting someone you barely know.
Based just on what they say?
That's faith.
It really speaks to her faith.
Even in her distress.
She recognizes the truth.
And embraces it.
It might seem illogical.
But she believes.
This shows the potential for spiritual insight.
That we all have.
That's right.
And remember, at this point,
she hasn't seen any miracles herself.
Just heard of Ammon's reputation.
But she chooses to believe.
In something she can't see or understand.
And this sets the stage.
For what happens next.
Yes.
Lamoni wakes up the next day.
We get this incredible scene in verse 13.
He reaches out to his wife.
And says, "I have seen my Redeemer, and he shall come forth and be born of a woman, and he shall redeem all mankind who believe on his name."
Powerful, right?
It is. He wakes up.
And shares this vision of the Redeemer.
A Lamanite king.
Bearing witness to Christ.
Someone who had been an enemy of the Nephites.
A pivotal moment.
It really is.
And it goes beyond Lamoni.
In verse 14, we see the impact of this.
Ammon falls to his knees in prayer.
Overcome with joy.
He's seeing his hopes and prayers fulfilled.
The conversion of those he saw as enemies.
It's the unifying power of faith.
Bringing together those who are adversaries.
And it doesn't stop there.
In verse 15,
the king's servants are also affected.
They start crying unto God.
Struck with the fear of the Lord.
Remembering Ammon's power.
Like a chain reaction of faith.
Lamoni's conversion sparks a spiritual awakening.
In those around him.
A reminder that our faith can impact others.
Often in ways we can't imagine.
And then there's Abish.
A servant who's been converted for years, but has remained silent.
She's been carrying her faith within her.
Alma 19.17 describes her.
Now there was a woman servant who had been converted unto the Lord for many years on account of a remarkable vision of her father.
It's like a hidden treasure.
Waiting for the right moment.
She sees what's happening.
This outpouring of the Spirit.
And it ignites something in her.
She recognizes the power of this moment.
The potential for others to change.
Like she did.
Like she's been waiting for a sign.
And she decides to act.
Driven by her faith.
She sets off to share the news.
Running from house to house.
Spreading the word of what's happening.
Verse 17 says she ran forth from house to house, making it known unto the people.
Think about it.
Years of holding on to her faith.
And now she shares it publicly.
It's a reminder that sometimes we need to step outside our comfort zone.
And share our beliefs.
Her actions have a ripple effect.
People start to gather.
Drawn by the commotion in her message.
But their reaction is mixed.
They come in with their own beliefs.
In verse 18 it says, "And when they had come to the house of the king, they beheld the king and Ammon and the servants of the king lying on the earth."
It's awe-inspiring and confusing.
Yes, it is.
Some see it as a great evil.
They blame the Nephites.
This is in verse 19.
Right.
Others attribute it to the Great Spirit.
We see that in verse 25.
It shows all the different beliefs.
And a lack of understanding of God.
It shows that faith can be confusing.
With doubt and uncertainty.
But it also shows that faith persists.
Even when we don't know.
Then things get worse.
Yes.
A man
who is filled with grief
wants to attack Ammon.
His brother was killed by Amnon,
He raises his sword to strike.
but he suddenly falls dead.
This is in verse 22.
It adds to the turmoil.
Dividing the crowd.
Some see it as Ammon's power,
Others see him as a monster.
sent by the Nephites.
That's in verses 26 and 27.
Yes.
Amidst all this,
Abish returns.
she sees all the division.
It's a heartbreaking moment.
Verse 28 says, "And it came to pass that Abish, seeing the multitude, that they were in great fear, and also that they were in much contention one with another."
She's saddened by the discord.
And this is where she takes a bold step,
She intervenes.
showing her faith and understanding of God.
So Abish comes back.
To all this chaos,
Yet a far cry.
from what she hoped for
Right.
when she went to share the news,
What shows us?
that faith isn't always easy,
Yeah, sometimes sharing truth and light,
is met with resistance.
fear and misunderstanding.
But Abish doesn't give up,
She sees the need and steps forward.
guided by her faith.
And what's amazing is
She doesn't try to argue.
or force her views.
Instead, she goes to the queen.
She takes her by the hand.
This is in Alma 19.29.
Right.
And the queen rises.
And says, "Oh, blessed Jesus, who has saved me from an awful hell. Oh, blessed God, have mercy on this people."
Wow, such a powerful declaration
It really is.
just moments ago.
She was lying on the ground.
Afraid and confused.
Yeah, but now she's proclaiming her faith.
It's the power of one act of faith.
A touch guided by the Spirit.
And notice,
She doesn't try to explain.
what out
She focuses on her own experience,
of God's mercy.
her salvation from darkness,
It's raw gratitude
and a plea for her people.
to experience the same grace.
And her faith has a ripple effect.
She helps Lamoni rise
And he sees the contention,
among his people,
so he steps forward.
a crucial moment.
Yes, Lamoni becomes a teacher.
Emboldened by his own experience,
He testifies to what he's learned.
it's a powerful ripple effect. It started with Ammon's teachings,
Then Lamoni's conversion
the queen's faith,
and her action.
now the king himself,
It all connects.
and his words have an impact.
Alma 19.31 says that as many as heard his words believed and were converted unto the Lord,
It shows the power of personal testimony.
inspiring belief in others.
This whole scene,
It shows how faith is connected.
each act of faith
From Ammon's teachings
to the queen's actions,
and Lamoni's testimony,
creates a spiritual awakening.
we're all connected in this tapestry of faith.
Our individual threads matter.
And as faith spreads,
We see a change in the Lamanites.
their hearts soften
They become more receptive.
to truth and hope.
The missionaries sense this shift
And they take the opportunity.
to minister to them.
Alma 19.33 says, "And Ammon and the servants of Lamoni and all those who had been converted unto the Lord did unite with their brethren, the Lamanites, and did minister unto them."
They come together
United in purpose,
to share the gospel.
and their message is simple.
They say that their hearts had been changed, that they had no more desire to do evil.
Imagine that.
A declaration of repentance.
And a desire for righteousness
It's the power of faith.
to change hearts.
And this resonates with the Lamanites.
They've seen the miracles.
They hear the testimonies.
Then they start to believe.
Some even share their own experiences.
They say they've seen angels and had conversed with them.
That's in verse 34.
These angelic visitations.
Show God's power in their lives.
It's amazing.
And it culminates in baptism.
Verse 35 describes it.
And as many as believed on the words of Ammon and his brethren, which were among the Lamanites, were baptized. And they became a righteous people. And they did establish a church among them.
Wow.
What started with a queen's plea.
Has become a community of believers.
It's the power of faith.
The ripple effect of grace.
It started with a seed of faith.
The queen's willingness to trust.
Even when she didn't understand
It reminds us
that even in darkness,
a spark of faith can ignite.
and illuminate the path for others
God can use anyone.
to accomplish his purposes.
Think of Abish,
A humble servant.
who played a key role
She was waiting for the right moment,
to share her faith,
and she acted decisively.
showing that sometimes faith comes in simple gestures.
Her example teaches us
To be ready to share our belief
to trust the Spirit.
and act when we have the chance.
And then there's Ammon.
His faith led him to this moment,
He faced danger and opposition,
but he persevered.
knowing God had called him,
His story shows us
that God uses challenges
to refine our faith.
and prepare us for more.
And it's amazing
How this chapter shows us
how faith is interconnected.
the queen's belief,
Lamoni's conversion,
Abish's boldness.
the servants' testimonies,
It all builds a spiritual awakening,
like a chain reaction
showing how God works through us.
to impact others.
And it's all about God's grace.
Verse 36 says, And thus we see that the Lord worketh in many ways to the salvation of his people.
It's the core message of Alma 19.
Salvation is for everyone.
No matter who we are,
Or what we've done,
if we repent and turn to him,
he will forgive us.
it's a message of hope.
And redemption.
It reminds us that God's love is boundless.
And his power is infinite.
It's incredible how this all started.
With the queen's worry for her husband.
It says a lot about her
Her willingness to ask for help.
and her openness to what she didn't know.
She was compassionate and courageous.
Remember, she didn't really understand,
What was happening to Lamoni?
but she felt something was going on.
Something extraordinary.
And that feeling led her to Ammon.
A man she'd only heard rumors about.
It's a beautiful example
Of how even a small seed of faith,
can grow into something amazing,
it reminds us
that we don't need all the answers.
to act in faith.
Sometimes it's just taking that first step
That leap of trust.
and letting God work through us
Exactly the story of Lamoni.
and his people
It teaches us about faith
and conversion.
and God's grace.
It shows us
That faith isn't always a big display.
sometimes it's quiet,
A simple plea for help.
like the queen's request to Ammon.
Trusting in something bigger than ourselves.
Even when we don't understand,
And we see.
that conversion can happen in different ways.
Lamoni's experience was sudden.
While Abish's faith was a slow burn,
Years of quiet belief.
leading to a moment of courage.
It shows us
That there's no one way to spiritual awakening
God works in unique ways.
with each of us.
Alma 19 also shows us.
The connection between faith and others.
From the queen's plea,
To Abish's boldness.
it all contributed.
To the community's transformation.
A reminder.
That our faith can have a ripple effect.
Inspiring others on their own journey.
It's like each act of faith
Adds to the momentum.
pushing the wave further.
And ultimately,
Alma 19 reminds us,
that God's grace is for everyone.
verse 30 says,
And thus we see that the Lord worketh in many ways to the salvation of his people.
it doesn't matter who we
Or
are,
where we come from.
what we've done in the past.
If we turn to him,
He's ready to forgive us.
it's a message of hope and redemption.
God's love is boundless.
And his power is infinite.
As we end our look at this chapter,
I am in awe.
it shows the power of faith,
And reminds us that God is always working.
even when we don't see it,
Think about this story.
and how it connects to you
Where have you seen God's hand in your life?
or in the lives of others,
How have you seen faith change hearts?
and change communities.
Remember, even small acts of faith can make a difference.
Be open to God's guidance
Be willing to share your beliefs.
and never underestimate His grace.
Follow our podcast and subscribe for more discussions like this.
Thanks for listening.